For 40 years, they poisoned people knowingly because they paid some scientists to prove the outcomes they wanted, collecting untold sums of money. And do you know what corporations said when people started to get lead poisoning and becoming brain dead or dying? They said the moms didn't do enough housework or dust enough, and they're bad moms, and they should make their kids wash their hands more because they're gross, because they're black.
Is there anything more sinister than blaming a mother for their sick child? I mean, that's some sinister shit.
Oh, you want to, no, yeah, there is. I'm glad you asked, because I actually have an answer. There is something more sinister.
It's geez. You said you had a bit for Austin.
I had a bit for Austin because when I'm thinking about these things, I always try to think of a comedic idea, and because I'm a fake comedian, so
I don't know. I've been listening to a few of your songs, and you get some good lines in there, man. You get some good one-liners.
I just need help, like punching it up, right?
No, I don't know. There's some. I'm like, that's
you want to see a dead body?
Yeah. So, what's the?
So the bit is, if you remember, it's based on this idea. Do you recall Operation Warp Speed? That was the Trump idea, and all these people that were in charge of Operation Warp Speed, which was to get the vaccine as quick as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is Warp Speed. It's completely against pretty much everything that they had laid out, the plans for, pandemics. So one of the big first planned everything, whatever, I'm kind of stuttering on it, was that you don't lock people down. And of course, politicians kind of pressured scientists into locking people down. And now scientists are kind of pointing the finger saying, it wasn't us. But we had this Operation Warp Speed that Trump loves to take credit for. And these were a bunch of jokers that jumped in and kind of ignored everything. And we're saying, we got this vaccine developing. Forget the idea that the technology was developed in 2014, right? So 6 years prior. I don't know how fast a warp is, but if you have something for 6 years, I kind of don't think it's warp speed. Also, if your product happens to be taxpayer funded, and also the federal government is mandating your product and running all of your advertising campaign for you, it doesn't sound like warp speed to me. But the bit's built on this idea. So we have this vaccine, this Operation Warp Speed, to get this COVID vaccine, right? They were charging Americans thousands of dollars per vaccine. In other poor countries, they would only charge people $6. But, American insurance racket also had to get their money.
Yeah.
Along with the, 500 days of lockdown that created 500 billionaires, a billionaire every day. Well, we didn't do anything but sit at home and get a little check. But sorry, the bit is we warp speeded a few $1,000 injection. And we felt really good about that. Could you imagine walking into a tat shop just to get a tattoo? I don't know if you guys got any tattoos.
Oh, yeah.
Walk into a tat shop and be like, listen, I need something warp speed. and then the tat guy's kind of looking at you like, warp speed, don't you want me to do a good job? Or don't you want this stuff to be kind of, if you're spending big money on this, this is a $2,000 tattoo. And you're just like,
this is the whole back. This is two tigers.
I need it now. I need it. I need it now. Warp speed. And I was thinking there are a handful of things you don't want to cheap out or want speed on. And we don't cheap out or want speed on tattoos, but we definitely wanted warp speed on a shot that cost a couple grand, and we just plugged that right in there. We don't even cheap out on tattoos, and it's just your skin. It's a picture of like, I love you, mom and dad.
Yeah.
But we definitely cheaped out and overlooked that warp speed on that blaster shot, right? I thought that was
like that.
I didn't frame it like you would, because you're a comedian and I'm not, but that I thought that was a pretty funny idea.
I like that premise.
Yeah.
It's because it is like just the name warp speed is absurd. Like the names they give, like warp speed, inject as many people as possible with this
6-year-old tech.
Yeah,
That's
6-year-old.
kind of, and they were like, this is a miracle. And it's like, well, if it was a miracle, it was a miracle in 2014 when it was made. It's not a miracle in 2020.
See, and why didn't they tell people like, all right, we've been working on this since 2014. I bet people would have been like, all right, there's been some years behind this, but then they'd be like, why are they working on it?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, it was framed as, we just invented this in a back room at the White House, warp speed it.
Well, I don't think it would be that hard to explain to people that COVID-19 was called 19 because it was a strand of COVID. COVID's been around for a while. So, I mean, if you tell someone, I think the analogy I've heard, and I could be wrong on this, is it's kind of like the flu, where, every year the flu strand hits a little bit different. And so when if you get a flu shot, there's so many different types of the flu that you're basically getting a shot of what they believe will be the most prominent strand of flu that year. That's how a friend of mine who's a paramedic explained it to me.
Yeah, well, we don't want to get demonetized. We need that 48 cents that we're going to get for this conversation, so we can just keep it moving.
Good thinking. Yeah, we do need that 48 cents.
So this, we'll get a dime each, and then we'll give the cat a dime.
It seems like a really long time ago. No one talks about it anymore. You hardly ever hear it brought up. It's like just reflecting on the fact that we lived through that insanity.
Yeah, it only closed a ton of businesses and restaurants, and people killed themselves and will continue to kill themselves because everything that they worked for in their life got taken away. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's cool because we can work remote sometimes more now.
There's people like that lost everything, like that wanted COVID. Like, why didn't I get COVID? Kill me, please.
Yeah, it was that was a rough go, man. And I think it didn't age very well. I was open-minded at the beginning, wondering what this was. Another thing that's pretty annoying is when something happened, everyone was like, no, this is fake. I'm like,
well, it's weird because in the beginning it was like Nancy Pelosi was saying it was fake. She went to Chinatown and was hanging out. And then I remember on Guncast even listening to it and being like, yeah, David's got a good point. Because you're like, people are saying, well, it's only a mild version of the flu. And you're like, I still don't want a mild version of the flu. Like, who wants to be sick?
Right.
Well, yeah. So I just didn't like the idea that everyone jumped to one conclusion or the other. Like, yeah, this is a mild version of the flu, which it ended up being. But it doesn't matter if you were right at the time because, we were about a week in and you probably didn't know that it was. You're just in my world, I know you didn't know it was because you're just some guy that dropped out of school and lives with his mom telling me about, viruses now all of a sudden, you got to.
Yeah. And then I'm like, I'll watch your next video where you talk about the earth being flat. I love those guys.
Exactly. So just to hop back on, just kind of talk about another conversation that we're constantly stuck in. We'll be stuck in that for a while, but I brought up about being stuck in the rut or the trap of communist or socialist or Marxist, whatever variation or flavor you want to use, and the capitalistic argument. So a good guy to helicopter around Naomi Klein does in her book is Milton Friedman. He said he had a lot of influence, and he said he was a preacher giving a Sunday sermon, which he was, because his religious fanaticism for economics was similar to the ideologues. And he believed economics was a science, although it's not, and it never has been, nor is he a scientist, because the term social science is an oxymoron. It's not like physics, but when you make up a phrase like social science, you kind of convince everyone, like archaeologists
right.
Call themselves scientists.
Yeah, because social scientists, they're like, what two words go together that will sound like I'm important and smarter than everyone else? And they They just grab social from this column and scientists from this one and put them together, and they're like, boom.
It's kind of like when people say that they can use science to disprove God, and it's like, yeah, that's not actually really how science is supposed to work. But anyway,
Science is a process. It's not, you know, these types of things like physics and math. You know, this is science and it checks out, and it's a hard science and it's stable. But I call that unfettered capitalism a religion because it rests on the ideological faith element. Like, we believe there's a God or a creator, right? They believe, although they call themselves scientists and they love to talk about how there is no God, they also start with a premise that's not provable, and it's a faith-based element. And that's that the free market is a perfectly scientific system and it runs flawlessly. And if there is a dysfunction within it, like unemployment or inflation or whatever it may be, that's because somewhere inside the perfect science, there's an imperfection or a distortion or an asymmetry. So does that sound familiar? Like when you come across an ultra liberal argument and you hear about socialism, you always hear about, yeah, it ends in genocide and societal collapse, but that's not real socialism. Have you heard that before? Like, they didn't
of
do
course.
Oh yeah.
A teenager will be talking about how Mao didn't do it right. So
Mao didn't do it right.
Yeah, from a 14-year-old who's like, let me tell you what Mao should have done.
Wearing a Chi t-shirt, got it.
Exactly, a Cheeto. And then, so the point is, you know, there's no scientific proof of any of these claims about the great free market God that they all worship. There's no example of a perfect system in the real world. There never has been. So just like the like-minded fanatics of today that build all of their beliefs, kind of like what we were just talking about, on computer models or loaded equations, they call the loaded equations proofs, which really just means they're playing with numbers until they fit into your theory or narrative, or rather the theory or the narrative that your boss, who's providing the funding for the research, is paying you to prove is true. So these are the same computer models they use to push the climate initiatives, but we can also set that aside. So the models of today, you might have heard about them. They're referred to as the science, which usually just means a corporate sponsored opinion.
Yes.
Yeah, right. The corporations. I mean, that's what I read one time, that popular science is basically corporations that can hire scientists that will prove their product, or, you know, basically anything that is coming to market. And then they write an article in Popular Science saying that this is, you know, eggs are now bad, so liquid eggs are better, you know, just something stupid like that.
Yeah, we as a channel and would do best to not get specific on this, but I will say in vague terms, there are things out there right now that we know are not, where scientific opinions are coming out about them that we know are not correct. And there are some scientists who are coming out and saying, I had my funding pulled, I had my research watered down. They took what I did and they changed it. And you have people who will go along with a lot, and scientists will go along with things that they know are not true because they get funding. And I get the hustle, dude. I mean, hey, you want to keep living your life however you're living it. And if somebody says, I'll give you this much money, but this is really the end result I'm looking for, you're going to find it. It's kind of like similar when people talk about, 99% of scientists agree in global warming, but have you ever stopped to think about scientists of what? You know, are we talking about a guy who's a scientist and, he's a scientist and like inner ear? I don't know. I mean, just the most random.
I'm just thinking about how in every Marvel movie, the scientist goes insane. And now I know why. It's because everybody wants a different result in pain. So they just put a bunch of octopus tentacles on and destroy cities. So I'm actually on the mad scientist side now.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, maybe the mad scientists are really the purists. But anyway,
it's really strange. You hear Neil deGrasse Tyson do this all the time. He conflates, what would that be? Kind of science, or the idea of using the scientific process, or being a scientist, or being a researcher, studier, he kind of lumps courage into that as if it's a given.
Yeah.
I'm a scientist, so I'm going to not take funding from corporations to do my research. And at the same time, you have this double think where, on the other hand, all you hear scientists say is, I didn't have any clue about that. I just want to be in my lab doing my work because that's what I love. And it's just like, which one is it?
Yeah, you need money to do
It's
that.
like Neil deGrasse Tyson. He seems just like a figurehead, like
He is, and
like
so was
Einstein. Why is it that the head scientist has unkept hair? Why is their hair always like crazy? Like they're so smart that
they can't
even comb their hair because they're so dialed into science.
Yeah, Bill Nye is the same way. He was a figurehead where they took some douchebag engineer who's an actor. I mean, let's not even get on the engineer path. He's an actor who played a scientist. He was a
stand-up comedian.
He was?
Bill Nye, the science guy, was a stand-up comedian. You can look up his sets online, and he got the role. He got the gig as Bill Nye, and then they just, it's like Screech from Saved by the Bell. I mean, he's dead now. God rest his soul. I played the first gig with him. I chose it when he got out of jail for stabbing a guy. Did you know that Screech stabbed a guy, David?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did the first show when he got out of me and him have a interesting history, but
damn.
Yeah, dude. But the same thing, he was like permanently Screech, like Bill Nye just became the science guy. They would play him for us in school and everything. But he was a stand-up comic that got a gig.
Yeah, that's people keep that in mind. Yeah, when they would wheel the card out in sixth grade and Bill Nye the science guy, and then these idiots are 30 years old now and they're like, oh, I believe his opinion. It's like, dude, he's an actor. He's an actor. You might as well like listen to Danny DeVito's opinion on stuff. Bill Nye is not a science guy.
And I hate
still doing his thing. I seen him on a flight. I just took a flight over to, I forgot where I was going, but Bill Nye is still doing.
Was he wearing a bow tie on the plane?
He was he was on the television.
He was
on the plane, talking about climate change. Yeah, of course. So he's going scientific, but just to get scientific, give you an example, so it doesn't sound like we're just a bunch of right-wing conspiracy theorists, which we will most definitely be called. Just how science is actually used in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Let's not go political. Think about lead, right? Well, lead had a big impact on my city. And I started looking into this lead thing about years when they started poisoning people and making kids mentally disabled. And I came across a bunch of people that have written about it, but we talked about ancient Rome a few weeks ago. Vitruvius, the Roman architect, petitioned the government to not build with lead 2,500 years ago, right?
Dang, I didn't know that.
Here we are, early 1900s, let's just say, building pipes, painting houses, throwing it in gas. We've always known it was poison. We always known this. And to go back to the former example about the tobacco industry, GM said leaded gasoline was a gift from God and patented it because they couldn't patent it otherwise, right? So they add leaded gasoline, they get a patent, right? It's a gift from God, lead. They funded scientific
That's
studies.
their tagline.
Exactly. It was So they funded these scientific studies to prove it was safe for 40.
And they published them in Popular Science, I'm sure.
Exactly. For 40 years, they poisoned people knowingly because they paid some scientists to prove the outcomes they wanted, collecting untold sums of money. And do you know what corporations said when people started to get lead poisoning and becoming brain dead or dying? They said the moms didn't do enough housework or dust enough, and they're bad moms, and they should make their kids wash their hands more because they're gross, because they're black.
Is there anything more sinister than blaming a mother for their sick child? I mean, that's some sinister.
No. You want to, yeah, there is. I'm glad you asked because I actually have an answer. There is there is something more sinister. It's
Oh,
when
geez.
they blame the baby. So then, when that didn't go over too well, they came out with a new campaign. They said the black kids had perverted appetites, so they couldn't help but put lead in their mouths because they were perverts.
What?
What year was this? This is like the bats in the
This was
China.
early 1900s,
They always blame it on the eating habits.
exactly.
Well, that's not even real. I mean, that's absurd.
Yeah.
So they ran around waving their scientific proofs in newspapers and on television, and people did the bidding of the corporations for them, just like they do today. So the point's not really about lead or whatever it may be, but it's this empire hopping from one grift to the next, and how we, the people, usually pay for it and sit here on podcasts complaining while they're on to their next con.
Right.
So it's good to kind of point out these issues just to make people aware, because most people don't know this, but think about the things that you're arguing for today that you really believe, and just look back and see all of the, cases where it was scientists saying this same thing. And this is kind of circles back to the socialism or capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, idea that we were just talking about. Was, I think this is one of those things where we get stuck in these ruts, arguing to no end. Abortion's another one, but for example, public schools will talk about socialism, a little bit of capitalism, then we'll talk about a little bit of disaster. Milton Friedman, for example, just to use him as a figurehead, because most free market economists and champions kind of believe the same thing, or kind of based on what he came forward with. And he'll panic about how a public school is a socialism, right? Like today we fund public schools, government funded. That is a form of socialism, regardless if people want to argue about our system or not. But if a school is a private business that we still fund because they're granted vouchers and grants and subsidies, while actually being a private company, i.e. operating for profit, he doesn't panic. So he thinks if someone's benefiting from owning the school, they'll run it much better. This is the kind of conservative Republican argument. Private business will run it much better, as if people don't run shitty businesses into the ground all the time, just like governments do. So they have a problem with the socialist public school, but they don't have a problem collecting government subsidies and vouchers when they own up schools. And that's somehow not, they don't have a problem with that socialism. Like, he doesn't panic about the corporate stronghold on government, which is actually by definition fascism.
Yeah, they're like, we're not taking money. These are coupons.
Right. So if his private business operates, he doesn't have a problem with the loose restrictions and all the, lack of government oversight that his private business operates, because these businesses don't operate the way you and I businesses operate. That's why when there's a global pandemic, our businesses close and never reopen. Their businesses get subsidies. So it's the same way for the Marxists and the socialists, how they panic about how we need socialism or communism or Marxism or whatever their preferred religion is.
Yeah.
But they ignore the fact that it causes just like capitalists ignore that unfettered capitalism, and this disaster form of capitalism crashes economies, closes businesses, does the things that we're pretty familiar with very recently. The Marxists, or whatever you want to call them, they admit that hundreds of millions of deaths are caused and genocides are caused, but they just say they didn't do it right. Just like Milton says, when an economy crashes or a recession happens, that they didn't do it right. That's what anyone says when you bring up their religion. So usually he says, and we hear this same argument today, he says they should have hung in there and did it longer. Markets crumble, small businesses shutter, inflation and unemployment's through the roof. They shrug with all the arrogance of an intellectual, and they say that wasn't true capitalism, which really means it isn't what I mean by my hypothetical theory of capitalism that will never be proven and has never been proven. And I can kind of point to a few things after the fact about why it didn't work. And even the arguments they use today are that's the market self-correcting when you get a recession or inflation right now. And have you ever heard of that by Republicans when they say that's the market self-correcting?
Right.
Labels.
Right. But it's really just people taking a crisis and using it as an opportunity. Like all the companies, they're like, hey, let's just hike our prices up, 30, 100%, and then blame it on COVID. Like it's just like a perfect time to just.
They never lower their price. Like I'll buy into the fact of like, okay, I do believe, that as gas prices go up or whatever, that you do have to raise your cost. I'm not a complete idiot. However, I do think it's a little bit of bullshit when they never lower their prices either. That's what gets me. That's just that's what bothers me.
The prices don't go down. The freedoms that they take, that they suspend, are never returned. And they are right in a way. It is the market self-correcting from their corruptions and their damage that they've dealt to the market.
Yeah.
The market is trying to butt back against it. And then, you have huge companies like, I think, Austin, we need to be a little bit suspicious of Matt here because, his last name's Bechtel. That's that's one of the biggest defense contracting.
I was hoping you guys would have figured that one out.
Oh, really? Interesting.
I'm put here by the Bechtel company to try to figure out what the hell David's up
I was
to.
wondering yesterday, I was trying to fall asleep and then I was like, wait a second, is Matt entered my life as my handler?
I constantly take pictures of Austin and he's wondering what I'm doing.
Exactly.
He told me he's got, because I asked him what nationality he was from, because I was pronouncing his name wrong.
Yeah.
I had it spelled with an R in my phone. And I just thought he like kept adding an L to it. Like that was just what it was. He's like, no, you have it spelled wrong. And then he's a Kennedy. He's got Kennedy.
Yeah. I was about to say, now David's really going to trip out when he finds out that on my dad's side, I come from a lineage of Kennedys. And maybe I should say this, maybe I shouldn't. My great grandpa worked on the A-bomb. I don't know much details about that. None of the family ever did, but I do know that he rolled with Eisenhower, FDR, and Truman a little bit back in the day. So I can't find anything historical on that, but so yeah, you guys would do good to be suspicious of me.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to continue my suspicion because there's a lot of things going on here.
I'm gonna sneak up behind him before he leaves and cut his hair. For DNA. Send it.
By the way, my great grandpa passed away of leukemia in the 80s, and supposedly everybody he worked with in the government died of leukemia on his team during the war, and the government never paid a dime for it. And we see that again today with soldiers and such who their whole unit, will get cancer or will get a disease and the government refuses to pay for it. Actually, that's a good transition. Let's talk about war. What is it good for? David, let's talk about how these guys profit off of war a little bit, because we kind of covered how they profit off of anytime something bad happens. And again, I'll say this actually before we transition. I'm not against a guy making some money. There was a guy that got arrested because he bought a ton of generators and then drove down to New Orleans and then he sold them. And this guy actually was doing good. Like he sold them for enough to cover his cost to drive down there, but he saw they ran out of generators and he went down and sold generators to people. And I think he got arrested for it. I'm not against that. I mean, if there is something bad that happens, they need resources, and it can be a very charitable and a good thing to sell things to people in need. Don't get me wrong. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are, like they want to bomb a community so they can rebuild it and make the money off of it. And, when things go bad, it's like, let's wait a second to step in until let's really see this disaster through before.
I'm starting to think that Nero pioneered that.
Yeah, it's
burned down everything.
Maybe it should be Nero Con would be better. But yeah, let's kind of roll into how it happens in the military.
Trying to think of a way to say it because I'm in the same boat as you. I don't really have a position as far as you know what I think's right or wrong. It's not like I don't have beliefs. I do have them.
Yeah.
But there are things that are blatantly wrong,
Of course.
that seem disagreeable to all parties involved. For example, again, I'm trying to, the reason why I'm taking a second is because I'm trying to position this to where both sides can agree on it. Like Mitch McConnell, the robot, he said recently, don't worry about that 113 billion going to Ukraine because it's coming back to military contractors anyway. He said,
Did you like my Mitch McConnell impression?
I was wondering. I thought you were having a stroke, but no, that was good.
When you said his name, I did.
Yeah.
I did. That was actually pretty dark of me to do that because I think he was just having a stroke when that happened. But
So basically, they're just giving it to our military contractors.
yes, the point is both sides should be mad about this. You know, we should, because we're both, no matter what you are in the country, you're paying for it. And if you are, you know, super liberal wanting to help Ukrainians, you're paying military contractors. That's what you keep voting for. Those bills that the war hawks keep putting forward, you're not helping some Ukrainian kid escape from, you know, the war. You're paying Halliburton or Bechtel. But the point is,
thank you guys.
You're conservative. You should be mad as well about, you know, funding that type of thing because, you know, $113 billion is flowing. I guess I could see the point where they might be okay with that because the way McConnell sees it, which is why he thinks it's okay to say it on television, is it's good for American businesses. And this is where the conflict kind of comes in. You know, for example, getting to the war topic, Rumsfeld was a Secretary of Defense while holding and chairing defense contractor companies, which was against the law. But do you know what the compromise was by the American government? He had to leave the room when they talked about something concerning his financial interests.
Like a little kid.
Yes.
Like the parents are talking. All right, get out, go in the hallway.
He still killed it. You know, it's just like
He's got a glass to the door.
Yeah.
Dick Cheney had 200,000 shares of Halliburton when he retired from his administration, which steered us right into the war that Halliburton received all the contracts for. So this is the war hustle. This, you know, you remember terms like homeland security or the war on drugs or the war on terror. Remember the great one, Islamofascism? We were fighting Islamic fascists with subcontract government subsidy funded private military corporations, which also meant using 9/11, our own money, to increase surveillance on us at home and take away our rights and our freedoms that we have.
That's the Patriot Act, baby.
That's the big Patriot Act. And of course, you can't, it's greatly named, just like a lot of these things are, you know, there's a lot of rebranding and they even updated the Patriot Act. But once again, you know, they had global cooling in the 70s. If you remember, that was a bad brand. So they changed it to global warming when it started to get really hot. Well, then it became cold. So they were like, well, it's climate change.
Yes.
So they do this. And when the government gives these military contracts, they're blank checks that basically say, do whatever you see necessary, which usually means build a suburb overseas. So our troops are so comfortable, they stay for over 20 years because they have a Walmart and a KFC. And then the company comes back and says, this is what we did. And then they pay them. So just to put it into perspective, do you know how many U.S. soldiers were killed in Vietnam? By the way, this was a 12-year war. This was about half of the war in the Middle East.
I'm gonna give a very wide guess. I know I've heard the stat before. I'm gonna guess
$1 trillion.
I'm gonna guess American soldiers' deaths. It was probably between 20 to 60,000 at most.
I'm going. Yeah, I was gonna go with 50.
Yep, 58.
Damn.
So 58,000 in a 12-year war. In my opinion, and you know, I don't want any American troops to die, by the way. That's not a war. Or what about Iraq? The nonstop, never-ending story that we were bombarded with for over 2 decades. Do you know how many Americans?
Was it 13,000 that died in that? Like
less than 5?
Oh, really?
Yeah, it cost $3 trillion. So, just to put it into perspective, of course, 1 million Iraqis died. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about trying to kind of outline this grift, basically, where we don't go and occupy a place for 20 years so we can spread democracy. If our plan worked, the old saying, I know it's simple and I'm a simpleton. So, the old saying, may the best man win. If our ideas were so profound and so great, we wouldn't have to kill 1 million people to try to convince them to use them. That's not how things work. Great ideas. Buckminster Fuller had a great quote that said, you don't destroy an old system by fighting it. You destroy an old system by replacing it and by making it irrelevant.
Well, David, I was thinking about going to eat lunch at Dairy Queen, and I asked Austin and he said no. So I was actually going to kill him since he didn't like that idea. So you're saying that I should have to kill someone?
That's really the logic here. They actually are quoted saying exactly that. No country with a McDonald's. This is a socioeconomic theory, but by the way, the people that call themselves scientists, they say, if you throw up a McDonald's and a Chase Bank, this country's going to have something to, live for and get rid of the,
That's what we want to live for. That's what they think of us. We want to live for KFC and McDonald's.
But hold on, dude, are they wrong though? Because all they're missing is an Apple store, and they might have the formula. Like, think about it. There's people in America. That's what they live for.
That's why they do it, because that's what we live for. That's what we believe. And they actually believe, and I don't know if they actually believe these things. I kind of think they do, but on the other hand, I just think they're, it's a hustle.
Yeah.
But this was a real idea that they pushed in. And just to touch on what we talked about last time, this is a civilization literally older than Jesus. And they're saying all we have to do is throw up a McDonald's. It reminds me of what we started talking about when we were talking about the Asian and what they eat in the wet market and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
We were just, it's just a big diss. Even when you're not trying to help the disenfranchised or these people that clearly need you to run to their rescue, which they never do usually, when you're not trying to help them, you're still dissing them. Even if you're coming from a liberal perspective where you're like, I want to help the world and save the world. A lot of these, middle-aged white wine moms that have too many Starbucks, they treat these minorities like animals, like they're their pets to be taken care of, like a
soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah, dude. I always, all my comedian friends who are Black, I always ask them if they hate liberal white women the most.
Malcolm X did.
They're always like if they post something, I don't know, on Facebook, and it's a racial thing, then all the white liberal women are in the comments like defending, like they need, like the Black people need the white liberal women to defend them and to protect them or whatever.
Yeah,
and it drives.
They're always the first to bring up race.
Nuts.
Yeah, they're always the first to bring up race, and then I also like it's like Michael Scott from The Office, for people who have watched The Office, where it's this mindset of thinking like every Black person you meet has been in a gang. Like I've had bosses like that where when they would hire someone who was Black, you could tell that they really thought that they just made world peace by giving this guy a job. And it's like, dude, he's just like, he came from the same community as us. Like we're good.
Yeah. It's hilarious because it reminds me of the Dave Chappelle skit. I think it's Dave Chappelle one where it's this Black kid who's acting like he's white or whatever, and he's like, "I'm a systems engineer for Coca-Cola." That's what it kind of reminds me of when they act like every Black is an ex-con that just got out of a gang and they're saving their life by giving him a second chance, and then you learn this guy's a doctor. You're just, it just doesn't really, it's kind of misguided, and it's a little bit sad in its own way. But this is what we do, and this is the guys that we do. By we, I don't mean us, besides maybe Bechtel, but other than that, like, we do this under the guise of spreading democracy and freedom and our ideas. But again, the main point I'm saying is, if your ideas are so great, you don't have to spread them with force. So take Chile, just to get it to the actual thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Chile is a socialist country, democratic socialist leader. His name was Allende. So that's Allende. The CIA colludes with a company called ITT to stop his election, and they fail because the people wanted him to be the leader. And when he was elected the leader, this will ring very nostalgic to you guys. When he was elected against the CIA's, election interference, they said they will make sure he doesn't last 6 months. So Allende wanted to nationalize some of the lucrative resources like mining. That's what all these people do. And that's what they want to do in the Middle East. They have a lot of money. They're sitting on a lot of money, just like they're sitting on a lot of oil. They're sitting on, this one was a mine. So at the time, 20% of the U.S. foreign investments are in Latin America. And again, this is that Tricky Dick. This is Tricky Dick and his boy Kissinger. He said, his quote was, to make Chile scream.
Ugh.
But, and that's not a playful,
Is that did Kissinger say that, or the Tricky Dick?
That's what Tricky Dick did. Kissinger, I wouldn't
make him scream.
Kissinger, exactly. That was his next trick. So what does that mean? Well, that's the same thing that they impeached Trump over, right? Make him scream means to withhold government aid. It means to threaten him with economic collapse. Multinational banks and other huge companies start visiting and telling them that they're not going to give them any loans. Essentially, they're going to stop the flow of dollars into the country if they don't do what they say. So what is making sure? That's just on the financial perspective. What does let's make sure he doesn't last 6 months mean? Well, that means that our boy, the goblin / demon who is turned 100, Henry Kissinger, is responsible for more Cambodian deaths than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. He comes in, and we have a corporate sponsored guerrilla named Pinochet. So Pinochet controls the military and the police. And that's our guy. That's who we're sponsoring. And by we, I mean the companies and perhaps maybe even Bechtel.
And me. Yeah,
but this Pinochet guy, Allende's governing, and he's liked by the people. He launches 24 rockets into the presidential palace, killing him and gathering tens of thousands of his supporters, mainly, activist leaders. It's almost like Tiananmen Square, but he gathered the Allende supporters, Pinochet did, and put them in a local football stadium where they could just perform executions and torture them like they were trained to do by the CIA. So anyway, Pinochet, of course, doesn't know how to run a government. He controls the military and he controls the police force, but he needs people to run the government. Well, what do you know? There was a foreign exchange program where a bunch of Chilean students went to the University of Chicago and studied under Milton Friedman and knew exactly how unfettered capitalism builds an economy up from nothing. And we need to
happily
get
ever after
socialistic, communistic thing. So he comes in, he appoints they even called them the Chicago Boys. So this is, again, what I'm saying.
They had a nickname?
Yes, of course they had a name. And when they did this in Russia with Yeltsin, they even called them the Chicago Boys. So these are economic technicians. And so it's a free game. They turn their country into the capitalistic dream, which means they slash all government spending. They privatize all the national businesses or functions, like mining or like these industries that they have that were funding the national, the whole nation. And so they get a 400% inflation, record number of unemployment, kind of like what we got during the COVID, where everyone's closing. They're making a killing. Everyone else is suffering. But when it didn't work and Pinochet was grilled on it, his economic leaders, or whatever they're called, the Chicago boys, they said, it's not the market's fault. We just need to do more, right? You know that quote. They were still using that, by the way. We just need to do more. We hear that a lot today. And so the economy contracted, inflation soared, local businesses closed, state-owned businesses were privatized, and the economy crashed. Now, remember, buying up all these assets, a lot of people just don't care about this shit, and I don't blame them because it's annoying and it's not really our job. You know, like I play music and Austin, you do comedy. Bechtel, the jury's still out on the company.
Yeah.
But we don't really care about this stuff, right? But the country's being bought up by private companies, and I'll loop it around to something domestic, you know, with our money. This country's being bought up with our money and loans. And even if it's not with our money, when these corporations go belly up, they're bailed out with our money. So either way you cut it, it's ours because government subsidies are our money. Just, you know, when the banks fail, Silicon Valley Bank most recently, and another couple other banks, the money was printed over the weekend and handed them to you. And we're on the dole for that. So in 2008, it was the same. Whenever some type of collapse happens, everyone acts so surprised. But as I just described in Chile, these same companies, this is JP Morgan, you know, Citibank and Citigroup and all these companies, they were behind this Chilean operation. When this happens here, everyone acts so surprised, like it was a big thing. They had done it a dozen times before 2008. This was just the move they pulled at home today. And Chile's collapsed. It was horrible. It took about 10 or 12 years to get out of the hole that it fell into, which any conservative would just say today that was market correction. But today, even the liberal New York Times or Wall Street Journal say that Pinochet was a man that transformed Chile's turnaround. But he wasn't. All he did was lead him into a depression and a collapse. And then the only state-owned company that actually never privatized, which I think was a mine, pulled them out of their thing. And so the citizens suffered, and just like a economic crisis usually happens, and the rich get richer, and those on the inside without regulation, and they get bailouts and they play with other people's money, and there's a huge wealth transfer, just like we seen a couple of years ago, creates oligarchs. And then they went on to Brazil. They did it in Argentina and Uruguay and to Mexico. The point is, it made me think of something funny while I was talking. Did you know about the recent scandal with the Bud Light endorsing the trans spokesperson?
Yes.
So yeah, everyone heard about this. Bud Light's endorsing the trans. We got the trans doing march, as if it's not comical in itself, right? We got this trans person drinking Bud Light to do a sponsorship for March Madness, right? Three things that don't
go together at all.
No, they don't make any sense. And they're all mad. They're up in arms, you know, whatever it might be. But companies have always done this. They've always chosen sides. There is a lot of weird stuff going on with, you know, the DEI and the ESG, but just setting that aside, just to go to an example that kind of is relevant to me at home, Flint, GM, whatever. You know, GM devastated our economy, sent jobs overseas where they could employ slaves and where there would be no trade unions or regulations, or if the people did make a fuss, the corporate sponsored military would just kidnap and kill them, right?
Yeah. These corporations, they act like their own state, their own independent state, or their own government or country.
Yeah, it's because a lot of them actually are. You know, let me just, on a little side note, a lot of these companies, these big companies, are actually screaming about privatization and the great of industry capitalism, they have a GDP larger than some countries, and just basically only on government contracts. And they're positioning themselves to be the next authoritative government on the matter. Like the military outsources the majority of their operations to private companies, our US military. So, for example, Israel handles most of our cybersecurities, although we have a Pentagon. So again, you don't have to be conservative or liberal to be pissed, because you're paying twice. We're paying for a subcontractor or a military contractor to handle our cybersecurities, and we're definitely paying for the Pentagon to also do the same thing. So we're getting robbed twice. But back to the Bud Light trans issue, or whatever it might be called, this is a little bit more of a serious one. In Argentina, they called the Ford Falcon the Death Mobile, because every time a Ford Falcon was on the scene, someone was killed or kidnapped. And you're like, oh, they must have loved Ford Falcons. No, once again, GM took their plants where they could have no regulations, where they could employ slaves, where they could pay people less, where there could be no trade unions, where there could be no activists. They stored tanks at Ford plants for intimidation purposes. And they took activists and union members who wanted to break, who wanted like hour lunches or wanted to go on a break. They tortured them. So when you're up in arms about the trans with the Bud Light, just remember, in Argentina, they called the Ford Falcon a death mobile. That's corporate sponsored execution. Mercedes did the same thing. So did Chrysler. So did Fiat. Fiat actually got about 6 of their activist leaders executed all at once. This is a car company, by the way, just in case you forgot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. David, I do have access to a Ford Falcon, by the way. So if I'll just say this, tread lightly when you keep mentioning the name Bechtel with me. Otherwise, you might see me.
Yeah, now he has a Ford Falcon.
I did. You guys you don't even know what I got access to. You better chill out with the Bechtel stuff. Otherwise, you're going to have a Falcon rolling up.
Yeah, the Deathmobile will show up. But
so the car companies are just murdering people.
I've never heard that
lunch
before.
breaks.
Yeah, keep going. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's old news. And once you kind of get hip to this, again, it's not just to be a downer. It's kind of just to be like, look at what's going on, man.
Yeah.
It got to the point over there where they were killing high school kids because they asked for lower bus fare.
Damn.
And their logic behind killing high school kids was they were infected with the Marxist virus and they must eradicate it. And what that did was strike fear into everyone so they wouldn't assemble or come together, and everyone stayed divided. And that's kind of what the point I was getting to, that we kind of keep circling around, is these are the ruts they get us in, talking about socialism, capitalism, japitalism, and wapitalism, and all this other stuff, right? But we stay in these ruts for decades while they make a lot of money behind the scenes. And then we act like, we did something when they decide to finally be like, all right, we made enough here. It wasn't like, to a certain extent, you can't just keep making that money because the people they're not going to put up with it. That's why we pulled out of Iraq,
Yeah, but that's like every corporation, they mark up everything an insane percentage. And then the goal is that a corporation can never lose money. So then they have to top the year before, even though they used COVID as a way to increase profits, but now they can't dip below those profits they made during a crisis.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is why you have to have a healthy fear and skepticism of government, right? And that's not just a socialist or communist government, but capitalist too. I still take capitalists over the other two. All things considered. And even with corporations, same thing there. What's nice about companies like in America is that they can, when they do something that you don't agree with, they feel the pain a lot quicker than a government necessarily, right? Because we don't buy their products. Now, sometimes sometimes the market doesn't do that. Sometimes it does. We've seen a variety of. Even BlackRock was taking a hit because people are getting tired of the ESG stuff, so which is shocking. So it's like, all things considered, I'll take it, but it is good to know these things. And it is good to realize that after a certain point, like David said, this isn't, when you think of a business or a government, this isn't your city council and this isn't your local t-shirt shop. This is like a higher level than, we could even ever imagine being in,
It is, and you should kind of be aware of what's happening to just be able to think a bit better, because it sounds conspiratorial, but narratives are being written and they aren't necessarily always true. So, for example, just like you said, people started to notice and condemn Milton Friedman because of this. We noticed a bunch of things going on, and he couldn't show up places or give his speeches without being interrupted. And he was compared as Chile under Pinochet to Germany under the Nazis, and Friedman's collaboration with him was compared with the technocrats' collaboration with the Third Reich. And do you know what Friedman called his critics? This is just to give you a great feeling of comfort that, nothing's changed in 50 years. He called them Nazis.
Yeah.
So, and what's even crazier, this is the thing about rewriting history that we should be also aware of. He got a Nobel Prize in economics for his great work.
Oh, yeah, of course he did. I mean, that makes actually perfect sense. Remember when they gave Obama one right before he bombed the hell out of the Middle East?
Yeah, he needed that for his great work in drone strikes, dude. He really advanced, the striking of a drone.
They gave Obama a peace prize for, bombing more doing more.
Yeah, but guys, it's because now we can bomb someone on their porch and not hit the surrounding areas. I mean, our drone technology's really gone a long way. So
yeah, well, it gets even better than that. So he gets a Nobel Economics Prize for his great work, although his great work just was, countless killings and tortured and a country's collapse. But the kicker is later, the next year, a company was giving the Nobel Peace Prize, forget the name of the company, for exposing the human rights violations that were happening in Chile and Argentina. So the same company, Nobel Economics Prize for the great work of, killing, torturing, country collapse, of that great economical work done the next year, the same company, Nobel Peace Prize, gives to a company that exposed the violations that happened in Chile and Argentina. So awards are given on both sides who was independently instrumental. You almost can't make it up.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, it kind of reminds me of the Orwellian idea of the double speak or double think.
I think it's both, really. Yeah.
I always think about that when people talk about Americans do it a lot, but even people outside of America, where they criticize America for not having free healthcare. I thought this was especially funny, 10 years or whatever ago, when they would praise Obama for his great contribution to the country called Obamacare and criticize America for not having healthcare.
Yeah.
Because
it almost makes your mind hurt.
Yeah, because you have to wonder, what's Obamacare if not healthcare for the poor, which we already know what it was. It was an expansion of Medicaid or Medicaid, which were two programs that we already had with healthcare for the poor. And now I'm not defending those at all or sticking up for them at all. They're shitty. I've had those my whole life, but I thought it was funny to criticize America for not having healthcare while praising Obama for creating free healthcare for the poor. And this is the double think and the double speak. And no one, I never heard anyone bring these points up. I've never heard anyone say, those couldn't be more opposite of the ideas. And what's funny was the free healthcare, the big air quotes around that, which was Obamacare, which was just an expansion of Medicaid.
Yeah.
It just allowed pharmaceutical companies to charge whatever they wanted for the medication, which was the only way that they would allow Obama to have his shitty insurance And he didn't care about us or the insurance. He just wanted to run to the American people and get praises for his complex pyramid scheme that was Obamacare.
And have it named after him.
Right. It's like we have Medicaid and
Obamacare.
What can we do? We can get them to accept some more medications and then rebrand it as Obamacare. And then the pharmaceutical company said, well, no, we're not doing that because we make way too much money. If you want to sign this, form that says we can charge whatever we want for medicines, and then we're okay with giving you your fake insurance that already existed that your country thinks they don't have. And it was just all these ideas being held. And again, whether side you're on, you should kind of be upset about.
Yeah. What about this? What about this logic? Greta Thunberg criticizes Germany and all of these governments. And so she makes a speech crying, saying that, she's not going to get a grow up because of global warming. So then Germany, instead of they get rid of their regulations for oil and drilling and stuff, and they just outsource it to China and Russia, who have no regulations. They don't care about pollution. They don't care about any of that. So now Germany just buys oil from these other countries, and they've actually made the climate worse because instead of doing it in-house and maybe doing it the right way, they're just saying, well, yeah, we stopped drilling by this much. Well, yeah, but we still need oil. So you dunces are just buying it from countries that don't have these, regulations in place. So you've just made it worse. Same stupid logic.
Yeah. You don't know if it's intentional or not, because we know that closing down these nuclear factories and all this stuff, that's a backwards move. And these other countries that they're outsourcing to are building not only nuclear energy factories, but even coal factories still. China's still building multiple coal factories, I think dozens a year. And they're putting the foot on the gas while we're putting the foot on the brake. And I don't think that's going to be a recipe for success.
No, they can't even. Recently, when I was in California down in Newport Beach, they have in Balboa Island and Peninsula, like a boat that you can take from one side to the other with your car. And whatever, Newsom's like, all right, everything has to go electric. Well, that boat, that ferry that carried them across, that probably won't even exist anymore, because in order to make the boat electric, it would be so heavy that it wouldn't float.
Gee, I didn't know that.
Yeah, for the amount of battery that would be on it. So like all these people are pissed down there because, they got like the Ferris wheel down there. It's, your typical.
Yeah. And that guy's trying to fill up. He's circling the presidential stuff. So I want to hit an off ramp here, and David, go over anything that you want to say if you've missed it or whatever. But really the point of this stuff is I would rather see people be skeptical of government and big business and the media, rather than embrace it all or fall in line and believe everything, especially with the scientific thing. That was a big point. I believe, weren't there ads back in the day in the tobacco industry that like 9 out of 10 doctors preferred, this brand of cigarettes? Like that used to be the kind of stuff they said. And when you were talking about the scientists, I was like sitting here, it was like sending chills as I was like putting all of this together about how long this has been going on. And it's so spooky. It can all be summed up, like hearing all this stuff. What's the main point of it all is, to quote Michael Jackson, they don't really care about us. Yeah.
Like you think these companies and corporations and everything care about you, but it's always the dollar. Yeah. It's always on, like you said, the next grift, the next con.
Yeah.
That's the main takeaway, in my opinion, is don't get suckered into thinking, Nike or Bud Light or a car company cares about your well-being.
Yeah,
they don't.
It's crazy to think that they care about climate change, or Ukrainians or anything,
Yeah.
They didn't, there's an old entrepreneurial saying. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's a super corny meme that was kind of going around with all the, I don't know what they were called, but in the self-improvement field about, which I try to stay away from, which is pretty obvious. I could probably use it and need some self-improvement. The only
I was
problem,
going to say, you try to stay away from self-improvement.
yes, the industry. They had an old saying, if a human behaved like a company, you would be a psychopath or a sociopath, right?
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you've ever heard that, but it's basically, it's obvious. They create these corporations and then they almost become like egregores or little straw men, basically, to do anything and escape. I always have a real suspicion about the naive approach that a lot of people take, where they just sit down and flat out say, I don't think any of these people are evil, but it's just, they got a family to feed. And it's like, if you have $70 billion, the family's fed. Just stop. Just the idea that they act with impunity, it doesn't matter if they're evil or not. They don't have consequences. When they break the law, they don't go to jail like we do. When they do fraudulent things or
leave
whatever,
cocaine at the White House.
Yeah, no one gets prosecuted. No one does jail time. Their fines are a fraction of their thing. And you can't talk about it, because I think I talked about this in the black metal episode where I was talking about Satan and God and, the black metal people, where, Satan being a Christian construct. And if you're so anti, and the idea of being so anti something, you're able to be used by the opposition. So if we have a conversation where you criticize capitalism, you're a communist sympathizer. If you criticize socialism, you're a right winger. Or you criticize people making money hand over fist from the climate change, then they say stuff like, oh yeah, he thinks climate change isn't real. Whenever anyone says something isn't real, you should stay far away from that person. Mm-hmm. Like during COVID, if you didn't want to wear a mask or get the shot, they would say he thinks COVID isn't real. And that's the low resolution that we're kept at, again, having these 40-year, 20-year debates. So we never get anywhere and they can continue to rake in cash. That's the tagline. Whenever you disagree with someone, and once again, you're just being used by the opposition, they deduce it down to, he thinks whatever it is, insert whatever, isn't real. We've now got to the point where we're no longer able to discuss anything. We now either think things are real or not.
Yeah.
That's a good way.
Yeah.
That's a good way to turn it up.
So Kissinger's been going goblin mode for like 50, 60 years. Is there any way, David, that on a Yavid track, we can have a Kissinger mode? Maybe you can kick us a Kissinger mode song.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to think about that. That's a good idea. Have you seen him recently? If you look at some of these people and you're thinking, I don't think he's a very bad guy, that's a goblin.
Dude, I know. All I'm thinking about, like, when we got like these people that George Soros, Kissinger, that have lived forever, are the goblin puppets from the Labyrinth.
Yeah, if you go exactly to Bowie in the Labyrinth, like there's
Bowie. If you write the Kissinger mode song, like you're the goblin prince, and then you could have all these goblins that are like Kissinger and everything dancing around.
Yeah, if you look at just go watch when Trump's sitting there with Kissinger. That was just the last time I remember kind of seeing him. And he's like, we're talking about good ideas. We're talking about great ideas. We're gonna do great. We're gonna do good. Look at Kissinger sitting next to him like a blob, and he's just a goblin, demon waiting in the shadows. Just look, just have a look.
Like Nosferatu, just.
Exactly. Or some of these people, like Austin said, if you take a look at them, you look at Soros, you think that's not a lizard?
Yeah.
You think that's
has to be a lizard
under there? You know what I mean? He's 400 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, their eyes are so spooky. It's always like the eyes. with all these world leaders that are that old. When you look at it, their yellow eyes. It is. I get it, dude. I get why
It's
people
because they've
get,
killed 300,000 people apiece. That's kind of that look that you get. You know how soldiers
Oh,
have like
that's that
the
look.
Yeah.
100,000 yard stare, and it's because they might have killed a few people.
Yeah.
These people have killed hundreds of thousands. I already told you about my last joke when about
Yeah.
walks in the room, but yeah, that's the glare that you achieve. That's why Hillary Clinton looks like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I think that what's good here is just to think about stuff. And like David said, don't have a low resolution opinion where you just write something off. Think about it. Think about statistics. Even when you hear a statistic, break it down in your head. Okay. They say 70% of people believe this. Well, okay, well, let's break down where are these 70% of people at? What is this? What is that? Think through these stats and believing the science and the scientists. Do they have any kind of a personal gain at it? That would do great. And again, really not even trying to do a corny tie into art, but there's that, I don't believe this, where people say like artists save the world. I think that that's just super corny, but
I think that artists sit around and talk about this stuff because if you're an artist, you're very observant,
and
because you have to be observant.
Some of the most creative and best art comes from looking at these things and trying to break it down and tell a story. 1984 Animal Farm by Orwell, he was basically just telling the tale of what he saw happen. But a lot of great work has come during the fall of an empire, or criticisms of a government or whatever. So I think it would do us all well to keep that in mind. David, you're going overseas, so we'll have a break in conversation, and when we come back, we've kind of made a decision that we're going to talk about lighter subjects.
Yeah,
and so we'll work through what our next one is offline. It's not going to be anything depressing, and hopefully this doesn't make you feel helpless and hopeless in the world. Just think about things. Things can get better. The best is yet to come. This is ToolShed Art Club. David, do you have anything you want to promote before we kick you off?
I actually believe that the artist can save the world. So you call
all right. Then wait, hold on.
I'm corny. I'm the corny. I'm the corny.
And you do too.
In what way?
In a degree, that artists can change the world.
I didn't say change the world. I said save the world.
Yes.
Okay. So I believe that. Yeah.
Well, cool.
All right.
That's all I got.